上当百年，欺世大官。
Hello everyone, welcome to Deception of the World. In the last episode, we talked about falsifications appearing in the communist media and becoming new materials for the CCP's brainwashing. And in this episode, we'll continue talking about what happened. Before we start, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now back to the topic. In the article, Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today, and Poor Meals, written by Xiaojiang on the internet, he also tells the story of the conference of the movement he experienced when he followed his parents to the countryside as a child in the 1970s. The family went to a place called Southeast Lake, which is about 20 kilometers away from the north bank of the Huai River. Xiaojiang, who was an elementary school student in the countryside at that time, had to participate in various brainwashing activities in addition to his daily homework, which centered on criticizing Lin and criticizing Confucius and other activities. The slogans not forgetting the suffering of the class and remembering the hatred of blood and tears, anti-revisionist and don't suffer the pain twice, almost became the mantra of elementary school students, and it was full of these when the little kids opened their mouths. In his memory, every school year, especially before the New Year's holidays, the school invited some poor farmers to come to the school to make a report of Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today. At first, everyone could listen carefully, but because most of the old peasants that were invited to give the report were not very educated, there was less of real content other than the scolding of the landlord, and the students lost interest in listening, so they chatted and slept at their desks. The conference often had to end hastily, until one day a big event occurred, resulting in future activities of these types being completely cancelled. It was around the Mid-Autumn Festival in 1974 when an old poor farmer was invited to give a presentation at the school again. Interestingly, when he was talking about his miserable experience of suffering from cold and starvation, the old man suddenly said, "No matter how hard it was, it's not as hard as the 60s. If I hadn't stolen a pocketful of grain seeds from the production team, I would have lost my life." The teachers and students sitting below were dumbfounded, and the principal quickly asked the old farmer to lead the stage. Anyone who is familiar with the history of the CCP understands that 1960s was not the evil old society, but a period of 3 years of Great Famine, when 35 to 45 million people died of starvation in the communist state due to the prevalence of the CCP's pomposity and underreporting. The old poor peasants' unintentional truth revealed the tragedy and the great crime of Mao, which of course frightened the principals and teachers. Because of such a big accident, the school's presentation ended hastily, but the poor meals began. Xiaojiang recounted an activity of eating poor meals before the winter vacation, because they are afraid of the possible health issues with students due to the poor food. The school used rice and green vegetables for the porridge, and did not mix bran in the steamed bread, but only mixed some dry vegetables in the cornmeal. As a result, the students found it delicious and it was hard to find a bowl left. School leaders saw such a scene, but also did not know what to say. The educational purpose of eating poor meals to thank the CCP was then defeated. The article Recollections of a Funny, Remembering Past Sufferings and Happiness Today conference during the Cultural Revolution also reveals the comical scenes that occurred during the conference. When the author was a third grade student, the school invited a poor farmer, Mr. Li, who was over 60 years old, to give a presentation. Mr. Li was illiterate, so he couldn't read the speech that the school had written for him, so he spoke up on his own. Mr. Li first talked about the old society. His family is poor and his parents were sick, so he went out to beg for food when he was less than 10 years old. One winter when it snowed, he went to the landlord's house to ask for food and was bitten by the guard dog, bleeding. When the story was told, the principal took the lead and shouted slogans. Unexpectedly, then, Mr. Li showing a proud look on his face and said, "What I just said was the most unfortunate thing. In fact, it was not always the case. Sometimes we were very lucky when asking for food. There were many kinds of landlords and rich farmers, who often gave us hot food. One time, one pretty girl from the biggest landlord's family in our village even gave me an appetizing fried egg." The principal was embarrassed to hear this and immediately whispered a few words to Li, who was very cooperative and embarrassed to say that he had gone off topic. The memory of suffering is not over yet, and then continued. In fact, the hardest thing was not before the communists took over, but during the 3 years of Great Famine. Grains were well grown in the fields in the years of the 58s, 59s, but unfortunately, the People's Commune movement started. The labor force all went to steel manufacturing with no one to harvest the grains. They all rotted in the fields. There was no food to eat in the early 60s, which was much harder than the old society, in which there were still landlords and rich peasants. After the liberation, everyone had no food to eat, and who are you going to ask for food? Mr. Li, who accidentally spoke the truth, was then quickly asked to leave the stage. The school teacher knew that Li spilled the beans. They hurriedly told the students not to write the report of Li and asked everyone to go home to their parents for the memories of past sufferings. The two places mentioned above are not the only places where the truth about the famine was revealed at the conferences. There is another article, The Tasteless Conference of Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today, which also tells what happened in November 1964 during the activity of Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today. At Xinzhuang Brigade, a farmer named Li Xiuying complained that 3 out of 5 people in her family died because of starvation in 1960, including her parents-in-law and husband. While Secretary Mao of the Commune and several cadres were eating buns and scrambled eggs in the brigade canteen, Li Xiuying stole a bun from the canteen when no one was looking but was discovered by Secretary Mao, who forced her daughter to sleep with him before she could take the bun. Li Xiuying pleaded that her daughter's body was swollen due to long-time starvation and she was willing to sleep with him. But when Secretary Ma saw Li Xiuying's body thin as only left with skin and bones, he scolded her and sent her away. Li Xiuying, who did not take the bun home, went home and cried out loud. After listening to Li Xiuying's speech at the grievance conference, Secretary Ma, who had used his power to abuse many women in the village, was arrested and violently beaten by the peasants. The next day, the secretary was found hanging from a tree, and the subsequent grievance conference turned into a corpse criticism conference. In February 2019, Li Rui, a veteran of the CCP's liberal wing and former part-time secretary to Mao Zedong, died. In his diary, he wrote that during the land reform, the poor peasants refused to share the landowner's land, saying it was a matter of losing their conscience. The truth, which was inadvertently revealed in the CCP's own Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today campaign, not only confirms that what Li Rui wrote in his diary is true, but also confirms that the image of traditional rural landlords is not as bad as the CCP's propaganda, let alone the vicious, brutal, and greedy in its dictionary. In addition, the CCP, through decades of continuous negative propaganda and political brainwashing campaigns, have firmly planted the term landlord as a derogatory term in the minds of Chinese people. And not only that, the CCP has also portrayed Liu Wencai, Zhou Baipi, Huang Shiren, and Nan Batian as representatives of bullying landlords who oppress the people. These 4 characters were called the 4 bully landlords and used as propaganda examples in articles, plays, movies, school textbooks, and songs ever since. Except for a brief taste of sweetness during the land reform, the poor Chinese peasants who were deceived by the CCP were relegated to the status of second-class citizens of the communist states for decades, unable to leave the countryside freely, and their lives became increasingly miserable. Most of the people who died of starvation during the Great Famine were actually peasants. That's why they can recite the tragic experiences when they remembering past sufferings and happiness today. Undoubtedly, this is a great irony to the CCP's Maoists who claim to be the great savior of the people. That's the end of the story, with the rural land reform after the CCP's usurpation of the power. The entire landlord class was wiped out. The traditional rural gentry class and traditional morals and values were also replaced by village party secretaries, village bullies, and a sense of despising for the poor and favors for the rich. The communist regime also achieved its evil aim of firmly controlling the countryside and the peasants. Nowadays, among the Chinese people who are oppressed by the CCP, the peasants are still at the bottom of the pile and suffering the most. The CCP no longer dares to hold any Remember Past Sufferings and Happiness Today conferences or eat poor meals remembering the hardship, because the truth has been revealed to the world, and everyone on earth knows that the cult-like Communist Party is responsible for all the suffering of the Chinese people. If it dares to recall the sufferings, it will be accused by millions of people, and no one will question it. That's it for today. If you like Deception of the World, please don't forget to like and share our channel with your friends and family. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Deception of the World.